In psychology, they say that the inner critic is not a single voice, but a shadow that follows us everywhere. It does not live only in the mind. It seeps into every corner of life, shaping how we see ourselves, how we connect with others, how we work, and how we dream. For many, it becomes such a constant presence that they no longer notice it as separate. It feels like truth itself, a background hum of judgment that colors everything. At work, the critic is ruthless. It whispers before every project. Asterisk, you're not qualified enough. Asterisk, it hisses after every presentation. Asterisk, you should have done better. Asterisk, even in success, it finds fault. Asterisk, you only got lucky. Someone else deserved this more. Asterisk, instead of celebrating progress. The person hears only shortcomings. They overwork to silence the doubt, chasing perfection that never arrives. Burnout becomes a way of life, because the critic never says, asterisk, enough. Asterisk, it only ever says, asterisk, not good enough. Asterisk, in relationships, the critic wears a different mask. When someone shows affection, it whispers, asterisk, if they really knew you, they wouldn't stay. Asterisk, when conflict arises, it insists, asterisk, this is your fault. You always ruin things. Asterisk, the critic convinces people to hide parts of themselves, fearing rejection if their flaws are seen. Intimacy becomes strained, because true closeness requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is precisely what the critic forbids. The result is a paradox, longing for love, but sabotaging out of fear of unworthiness. In the mirror, the critic is merciless. It does not simply point out flaws. It exaggerates them, invents them, distorts them until self-image is unrecognizable. A small mistake becomes a catastrophe. A natural imperfection becomes proof of failure. The critic convinces a person that they are ugly, lazy, weak, broken. And because this voice speaks from within, it is rarely questioned. They believe the critic as if it were fact, forgetting that it is only an echo of past judgments. Even in dreams and ambitions, the critic intrudes. It whispers, asterisk, why try? You'll fail anyway. Asterisk, asterisk, others are better than you. Asterisk, asterisk, you're too late, too old, too inexperienced. Asterisk, it turns vision into hesitation, and hesitation into paralysis. Many give up before they even begin, not because they lack talent, but because they are convinced by the critic that they lack worth. The tragedy is not the failures that happen, but the lives that are never fully lived because the critic convinced someone not to try. Psychologists explain that the inner critic thrives on absolutes. It speaks in always and never. Asterisk, you always fail. Asterisk, asterisk, you never get it right. Asterisk, these distortions are powerful because they erase nuance, leaving no room for growth. A mistake is no longer a lesson. It is a verdict. A setback is no longer temporary. It is identity. Over time, people stop separating themselves from a voice. They no longer say, asterisk, my critic says I'm worthless. Asterisk, they simply say, asterisk, I am worthless. Asterisk. In psychology, they say that the critic is not reality, but repetition. It repeats the voices of parents, teachers, bullies, cultures that demanded too much and forgave too little. And unless challenged, it becomes a lens through which we see everything, ourselves, our relationships, our possibilities. Life shrinks under its weight. Joy is muted, ambition stifled, love strangled. The critic does not destroy us in one blow. It wears us down with 1,000 quiet cuts. In psychology, they say that the inner critic is not born with us. It is built. Every harsh word, every disappointed glance, every standard we cannot meet adds a brick to its voice. By the time we are adults, the critic speaks so fluently that we forget it was ever constructed. It feels ancient, permanent, like part of who we are, but it is not our essence. It is the echo of lessons learned in fear. In childhood, the seeds of the critic are planted in the soil of expectation. Some children grow under parents who believe criticism was the surest path to success. Asterisk, don't get cocky. Do better. You'll never make it if you don't try harder. Asterisk, the intention may have been to motivate, but the message was clear. Asterisk, you are not enough as you are. Asterisk, over time, the child begins to repeat these words inwardly, long after the parent's voice is gone. The external voice becomes internal law. For others, the critic grows from shame. A mistake is not treated as a moment of learning, but as evidence of failure. A bad grade, a clumsy accident, a forgotten chore, all met with humiliation rather than guidance. The child absorbs not only the lesson of the moment, but the identity beneath it. Asterisk, I am careless. I am stupid. I am a disappointment. Asterisk, these labels harden into the inner critic's favorite phrases, repeated decades later as if carved into the mind. Adolescence strengthens the critic further. In school, comparison sharpens its teeth. Teachers reward the best. Peers mock the different. Society praises perfection. Every imperfection becomes ammunition. The critic learns new lines. Asterisk, you're behind. You'll never catch up. Everyone is better than you. Asterisk, social rejection, bullying, or even subtle exclusion magnify its authority. The voice of the critic grows confident because it is reinforced by the chorus of the outside world. Even success can feed the critic. When praise is tied only to performance, children learn that love is conditional. Asterisk, I'm proud of you because you won, because you aced a test, because you made us look good. Asterisk, achievement becomes the only way to feel worthy. And so the critic learns to lash out whenever achievement falters. In adulthood, this voice drives ambition but poisons peace, demanding constant proof of value and dismissing every moment of rest. What makes the critic so persuasive in adulthood is its disguise. It does not sound foreign. It sounds like us. It uses our own tone, our own memories, our own doubts. It says, asterisk, I'm only telling you the truth. I'm protecting you from humiliation. I'm keeping you safe from rejection. Asterisk, but psychology reveals that this is not truth. It is trauma. It is the past replayed so often that the mind mistakes it for reality. In psychology, they say that the inner critic is powerful not because it is right, but because it is familiar. It has been with us so long that silence feels unnatural without it. To challenge it feels like betraying a part of ourselves. Yet the truth is the opposite. The critic is not who we are. It is who we learn to be in order to survive. And when this is understood, the first cracks appear in its authority. In psychology, they say that the inner critic, once rooted in childhood, becomes a governing force in adulthood. It no longer needs external reminders. It polices the self from within. What once began as a few cautious warnings evolves into a full system control, dictating how a person speaks, chooses, loves, and dreams. Life under the critic's rule is not freedom but constant negotiation with imagined failure. In careers, the critic disguises itself as caution, but its real work is sabotage. People decline promotions, fearing they will prove themselves unworthy. They refuse to share ideas, convinced they will sound foolish. They overprepare for every task, exhausting themselves to meet impossible standards. And when success comes, it feels hollow, because the critic insists, asterisk, it wasn't you, it was luck. You don't deserve this. Asterisk, what should be triumph turns to emptiness. In relationships, the critic enforces masks. It whispers, asterisk, don't show too much. Don't be vulnerable. If they see the real you, they will leave. Asterisk, so the person hides parts of themselves, desires, flaws, fears, until closeness feels impossible. Intimacy requires authenticity, but the critic punishes authenticity with shame. Over time, partners may feel distance, sensing walls that never lower. The critic promises protection, but it delivers loneliness. In personal growth, the critic is the master of limitation. It stops people from learning new skills. Asterisk, you'll embarrass yourself. Asterisk, it blocks creative expression. Asterisk, you're not talented enough. Asterisk, it silences ambition. Asterisk, you'll fail, so why try? Asterisk, many adults live smaller lives not because they lack potential, but because the critic convinces them that potential is dangerous. Better to stay safe in the known than risk humiliation in the unknown. Psychologists note that the critic thrives in moments of rest. When the body slows, when the mind is quiet, its voice grows loud. Asterisk, you're lazy. You should be doing more. You'll fall behind. Asterisk, even relaxation becomes punishment. The person cannot rest without guilt, cannot stop without shame. The critic turns life into an endless race, with no finish line, no victory, only exhaustion. The tragedy is that many believe the critic is truth. They cannot separate themselves from its words. Instead of saying, "My inner critic says I'm worthless," they say, asterisk, "I am worthless." Asterisk instead of hearing, "You might fail." They hear, asterisk, "You are failure." Asterisk identity fuses with judgment until the self is defined not by dreams or values, but by the critic's endless verdicts. In psychology, they say that the critic is not reality but repetition, an echo of old fears replayed in new moments. Yet because it feels familiar, it feels real, and until it's questioned, it controls not only decisions but entire lives, shrinking them into something far smaller than they were meant to be. In psychology, they say that the inner critic is not just a voice. It is an enemy disguised as a friend. It does not attack directly with knives or chains, but with whispers that cut deeper than any blade. Its weapon is doubt, its shield is shame, and its battlefield is the mind itself. For those who live under its rule, every attempt to rise is met with the same command. Asterisk, sit back down. You are not enough. Asterisk, the critic robs joy first. When happiness arrives, even in fleeting moments, it interrupts. Asterisk, don't laugh too loud. Don't trust this. It won't last. Asterisk, instead of letting joy expand, the person shrinks it, suspicious of their own right to feel good. Over time, life loses color. Smiles feel forced. Laughter feels guilty. Peace feels undeserved. The critic does not need to take joy away. It only needs to convince you that joy was never yours to begin with. Then it robs ambition. When dreams appear, the critic counters with evidence. Asterisk, remember the time you failed. Remember when they laughed at you? Remember when you quit? Asterisk, each memory becomes proof that failure is inevitable. The person stops reaching, stops daring, stops hoping. Ambition doesn't die in one moment. It dies by 1,000 whispers convincing you not to try. The critic also poisons love. When a partner says, "I care about you," the critic responds, asterisk, "They'll leave once they see who you really are." Asterisk, when trust begins to grow, it whispers, asterisk, "You don't deserve this closeness. Don't let them in." Asterisk, it convinces people to hide, to test, to sabotage. Relationships collapse not because love was absent, but because the critic built walls too high for intimacy to climb. Perhaps its cruelest trick is the way it attacks rest. When the body longs for stillness, the critic scolds, asterisk, "You're lazy. You're wasting time. Others are working harder while you fall behind." Asterisk, what should have been recovery becomes punishment. People collapse not from weakness, but from years of denying themselves rest under the critic's constant surveillance. Psychologists warn that the inner critic thrives on absolutes. It is never gentle, never balanced, never nuanced. It says always and never, turning single mistakes into lifelong verdicts. Asterisk, you always fail. You never get it right. Asterisk, this absolutism tricks the mind into believing that the critic is objective truth rather than distortion. And when a person believes it, the critic doesn't just comment on their life. It controls it. In psychology, they say that the critic's greatest victory is not in shouting us down, but in convincing us that its voice is our own. It does not need to chain us if it can make us chain ourselves. And so, many live half-lives, not because they lack ability, but because they are too busy obeying an invisible tyrant within. In psychology, they say that the first step in breaking free from the inner critic is not silencing it, but noticing it. For years, people live as though the critic's voice is their own. They say, "I'm worthless," not realizing the thought was planted. They whisper, "I'll fail," without questioning who first taught them that failure was shameful. Awareness cracks the illusion. Asterisk, this voice is not me. It is something I learned to survive. Asterisk, the act of noticing changes everything. Once the critic is named, it loses some of its invisibility. Instead of being the air one breathes, it becomes a voice in the room. And when it becomes a voice in the room, it can be challenged. People begin to ask, asterisk, is this true? Is it helpful? Would I say this to a friend? Asterisk, for the first time, doubt is aimed not at the self, but at the critic itself. This awareness opens a door for another voice, the voice of compassion. At first, it is faint, almost unconvincing. It says, asterisk, you're doing your best. You deserve rest. Mistakes don't erase your worth. Asterisk compared to the critic. This voice feels weak, sentimental, naive. But psychology teaches that self-compassion is not weakness. It is medicine. And the more it is practiced, the stronger it becomes. Some find this voice through therapy, where old wounds are named and reframed. Others find it in journaling, meditation, or conversations with trusted friends. Wherever it comes from, the experience is the same. The realization that the self does not need to be punished into growth. It can be nurtured into it. The critic resists. It insists, asterisk, if you stop listening to me, you'll become lazy. You'll fail. You'll embarrass yourself. Asterisk, but with time, people discover the opposite. Encouragement fuels more growth than shame. Compassion gives more energy than cruelty. Self-acceptance creates more courage than self-attack ever could. The critic promised safety, but compassion delivers strength. Psychologists describe this turning point as the birth of an inner ally. Where once the self was split, critic and victim, there now emerges a third presence, the compassionate observer. This part does not erase the critic, but interrupts its monopoly. It speaks when the critic attacks, balancing harshness with kindness, distortion with truth. In psychology, they say that freedom begins not when the critic is destroyed, but when it is dethroned. The voice may never vanish completely, but it no longer rules unchallenged. And in that space between the critic's cruelty and the ally's compassion, a new kind of life begins to grow, one defined not by shame, but by possibility. In psychology, they say that when the inner critic begins to lose its grip, the change does not stay hidden in the mind. It radiates into every part of life. What was once a cage of self-doubt becomes a field of possibility. And though the critic's voice may still whisper, it no longer dictates the script. Instead, the person learns to listen to another voice, the quieter, steadier voice of compassion and courage. In work, the transformation is profound. The same projects that once felt paralyzing now become opportunities. A mistake is no longer evidence of incompetence, but a lesson. Success is no longer dismissed as luck, but embraced as earned. People begin to take risks they once avoided, applying for positions, sharing ideas, stepping into leadership. Failure still stings, but it no longer defines them. They finally discover what psychologists mean when they say that resilience grows not from perfection, but from permission to try. In relationships, intimacy blooms where fear once lived. Instead of hiding flaws, people begin to reveal them. Instead of apologizing for every perceived mistake, they trust that love can survive imperfection. The critic used to whisper, asterisk, if they see the real you, they will leave. Asterisk, but now the heart replies, asterisk, if they love the real me, they will stay. If not, I am still enough. Asterisk vulnerability, once terrifying, becomes a doorway to deeper connection. Love stops being performance and starts being presence. In dreams and ambitions, doors reopen. The projects once abandoned resurface. The passions once buried are given breath. The critic's asterisk, why bother? Asterisk is replaced with asterisk, why not? Asterisk artists create again. Writers write again. Entrepreneurs take chances again. The energy once drained by shame is now fueled by possibility. Life expands in directions that once felt forbidden. Even the body responds. Psychologists note that living under constant criticism keeps the nervous system in a state of hypervigilance. Stress hormones spike, muscles tense, sleep fractures. But as compassion grows, the body learns to rest. Breathing slows, shoulders drop. Rest becomes recovery, not guilt. The immune system strengthens. The mind clears. Peace is no longer foreign. It becomes a new baseline. The greatest change, however, is internal identity, where once the critic's words fuse with self-worth. Asterisk, I am worthless. I am a failure. Asterisk, there is now separation. The person learns. Asterisk, I am not my critic. I am more than its voice. Asterisk, this shift creates freedom not only from shame, but from fear of the future. They can step forward not needing certainty, because their worth no longer depends on outcomes. In psychology, they say that healing is not about erasing the critic entirely. It is about learning to live louder than its voice. The critic may never vanish, but it no longer commands obedience. Instead, the self learns to answer with kindness, to act with courage, to live with openness. And in this way, what was once the harshest enemy becomes a background noise of a story rewritten by compassion. In psychology, they say that the deepest healing is not only personal, it becomes communal. When someone learns to challenge their inner critic, they do more than transform their own life. They create a light for others still trapped in the shadows of self-doubt. What once was a private battlefield becomes a source of wisdom, empathy, and guidance. Those who once whispered, "I am not enough," now recognize that same whisper in others. They see it in a colleague apologizing too much, in a friend dismissing their own success, in a partner who cannot accept love. Because they know the voice themselves, they recognize it instantly in the lives around them. And instead of judgment, they offer compassion. They say, "I know that voice. I live with it too. But it is not the truth of who you are." In families, the shift is generational. Parents who once carried their own harsh inner critics now pause before passing the same burden to their children. Where their parents once said, "Not good enough," they say, "I'm proud of you, no matter what." Where shame was used to discipline, compassion is used to teach. The cycle begins to break, not just for one person, but for those who come after. In friendships and relationships, the healed heart becomes a safe space. Instead of withdrawing or judging, they listen deeply. They remind others that mistakes do not erase worth, that flaws do not cancel love, that failure is not identity. They model vulnerability, showing that it is possible to share weakness without shame. And in doing so, they invite others to lower their own walls. Even in workplaces and communities, this transformation ripples outward. A person who once silenced themselves under the critic's weight now speaks up, not only for themselves, but for others. They challenge toxic cultures that glorify perfection and punish imperfection. They encourage teammates, mentor the hesitant, and remind peers that growth requires space to fail. What once was a private struggle becomes a public strength. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. The idea that from wounds can come wisdom, from scars can come strength. The inner critic, once an enemy, becomes the very reason someone learns empathy. Having lived through shame, they become fluent in compassion. Having carried silence, they become advocates for truth. In psychology, they say that the greatest victory over the inner critic is not merely silencing it for yourself, but helping others see beyond theirs. The voice that once chained you becomes a bridge that connects you to others. And through that connection, healing spreads far beyond the self. In psychology, they say that the most powerful transformation a person can experience is not in silencing the world around them, but in transforming the world within them. The inner critic, once the loudest voice in the mind, may never disappear entirely, but its reign can end. What was once a tyrant becomes background noise. What was once a prison becomes a foundation for freedom. The final stage is not about erasing the critic. It is about reclaiming authority. The person no longer asks, "How do I make the voice stop?" Instead, they learn to ask, "Which voice do I choose to believe?" And in that choice lies liberation. The critic may whisper, "You are not enough." With the heart answers, "I am worthy." The critic may say, "You will fail." The spirit replies, "I will try anyway." The critic may hiss, "Love will not last." The soul responds, "I will love while it does." The voice of compassion does not erase fear, but it speaks louder. This transformation reshapes life at every level. The once exhausted professional no longer works to prove their value. They work because they have value already. The once guarded lover no longer hides behind masks. They show up fully, trusting that real love embraces flaws. The once silenced dreamer no longer postpones their vision. They step into it, willing to stumble, knowing that worth is not measured by perfection. Life expands where once it was caged. The critic, ironically, becomes a teacher. It reveals the old wounds that needed healing, the patterns that needed breaking, the lies that needed unmasking. Without it, perhaps the person would never have learned compassion for themselves or for others. What once felt like an enemy is understood as a distorted protector, one that tried to keep them safe, but in doing so, kept them small. By outgrowing the critic, the person does not only heal, they evolve. Psychologists call this integration. The self no longer fights pieces of itself, but holds them together. The critic's voice, though still present, is balanced by the ally's voice, the compassionate guide. Instead of a battlefield, the mind becomes a counsel. Doubt speaks, but so does courage. Fear whispers, but so does hope. And the final choice belongs not to the critic, but to the self. In psychology, they say that freedom is not found in silence, but in choice. The inner critic may always murmur, but it no longer commands. The person who once lived in its prison now walks in open fields, carrying both wounds and wisdom, shame and strength. And in that walk, they discover the ultimate truth. They were never broken. They were always becoming.